Hey there. You are watching the Visual Studio Code launch party for August 2020, release version 1.49. I'm Brian Clark, your host, and I'm happy to have you here with us. Welcome. You're in good hands, and you won't be disappointed with what we have in store for you today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us as the team is trying this out as a new live event in a way to connect with you all, connect with developers in the community, and also to just showcase some of the awesome features you might find useful as part of your development workflow. These typically go for about 40 to 45 minutes or so. If you're watching us over your lunch, you can sit back and enjoy your lunch, maybe a morning cup of coffee, or maybe you just digested your supper. We'll keep you entertained for the bit of it. And a quick note, before we jump deep into the amazing demos that the VS Code team has for you all, I want to remind folks that maybe you can't always catch these events live. Maybe you're busy, it's hard to join them, or, I don't know, you just got stuff going on. It's busy. It's crazy nowadays. So if you want, you can check out the recording of these on the Visual Studio Code YouTube channel. There, you'll be able to watch the whole recap of everything again. But maybe you're not into visuals. Maybe you're not great at learning from video is not best fit for you. You prefer to read. Well, we have you covered there as well, because every release, there is a nice document that's the release notes that you can go through. There's two ways, or a couple ways at least, that you can check those out. One is via the Visual Studio Code website. That is code.visualstudio.com. And at the top, you'll see this banner that tells you the latest release version that's out there with a link to check out the release notes. And in there are all the details of the nice new features that are going to help you out in your development workflow. In addition to that, you can, without having to move out of the context of your favorite editor, you can look at the release notes directly in VS Code. If you go to the Help menu at the top, there will be an option there for release notes, and that will prompt up a new tab in Visual Studio Code for you to read through the release notes. All right, I think that about does it in terms of how I wanted to prepare you all and get you ready for today's launch party. So sit back, relax, and without further ado, first up, we have for you is Johannes, who's going to be showing about format-only modified lines correction there. So Johannes, over to you.
All right, thank you. Trying to share my screen, the right one. All right, so I do want to show a new feature that we added. It's called format modified lines. And I want to do this by fixing a bug that was reported. So I'm working recently on GitHub issue notebooks and the native notebook support in VS Code. And a bug has been reported that if you run a query with a sort statement, that it returns only a few results versus when you run it without the sort statement. So these are the same two queries. I also recently learned about the prettier formatter, which seems to be pretty popular. So I want to give it a try in this project of mine, which is the GitHub issue notebooks project. I did set it as the default formatter for TypeScript, and I'm also fiddling with some settings to say format on save. So format on save is a feature that we just save everything when you save, format everything when you save. You can also turn it off if you like manual formatting. So now to fix this bug, I am a good developer and I start with unit test, and I'm a really fast typer. And there I have my unit test that I want this query. So this is basically what's being typed in the notebook, and I want it. This one I want to be fired to GitHub. This is the query, and then the sort portion should be extracted into sort semantics and not part of the query. So this is my suspicion that something is wrong here. And now because I'm like so much into prettier now, I want to see how it's formatting my source code. If I do this the usual way, I would say format document. It is my default formatter as I have configured up here. So it would just go in, and you see I have a lot of modifications now, right? If I save the file, if I head over to the Git view-let, you see like everything has changed. This might be fair, maybe you want this, but in the context of fixing a bug, if you look at the diff or if you look at the blame later, you see so many modified lines, you do not understand what has changed. So maybe this is a little bit too much. So let me undo this change and let me go back to my test, bring back what I just deleted, fast typer. And now I want to say, okay, this is new code. I want my new code to look the new way, which is the pretty way. So what I can do is, instead of saying format document, the whole thing, I say only format modifications. So we have a new command, which is available in the command palette, which is called format modified lines. And it does what you think it does. It formats everything that has been modified. And now you see I ran it, and it only touched this test. All the other things are still looking the old way. Now, the interesting challenge is what is a modification? It's always what the source control provider thinks you have done. So whatever shows up as a delta to what your Git state is will be considered a modification. I think the easiest way to figure out what will be formatted is these lines on the side. So there's indication for new things, and there's indication for changed things. And this what will be modified. Then if you don't want to go in and always say format modified lines, you can say there's a format on save mode, which used to be format the whole file on save. And now we can say only format modifications. And then you have format on save enabled. And let me go and try to break this formatting again. And now I just save, and everything is pretty again. Yeah, that's format on save. I think the key message is it does work with prettier. It doesn't work for all languages with prettier. So the rule of thumb is that you should apply. If format selection is supported, then format modified lines is supported. Because what we ask extensions is basically to say, given this big document, only format a subpart of it, which is the same feature as format selection. And that's all about format modified lines.
Excellent. Johannes, so question for you right off the bat, and I'm waiting to see if folks that are watching live have any questions that they'll drop into the Q&A that we have there. But one, I saw how fast you typed before. I know it's a little bit unrelated, but I have to ask, how did you become such a fast typer?
It's practice, dude. It's practice.
Lots of practice. Okay,
I'm programming VS Code for 9 years now, right?
Yeah. Very good, very good. So this is an amazing, I'm personally very excited about this because there's been plenty of times where I'm collaborating with other teammates and we're reviewing each other's PRs, and it just shows like all this formatting changes that are unrelated. And this I'm just props to you all for this feature because it's going to save a lot of extra effort to try and discern what in the PR is actually meant to be reviewed. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right. I don't see any questions currently, but if you have some that come up, folks, later on, we'll have a little bit of room at the end of the session today where we can come back to ask Johannes questions about these format on modifications. Thank you again for showing us that. Next up, we have Matt, who's going to show us some of the TypeScript 4.0 features that are available within Visual Studio Code. Matt, over to you.
All right, so the new TypeScript version that's included in VS Code includes some new language features, but we also have a number of new tooling features that I want to spotlight. So let me just start sharing my screen here and go over here. Is that sharing the right screen? And okay, so one of the features is that for a while now, TypeScript has supported the optional chaining syntax in JavaScript. And this iteration, we actually added a refactoring that makes converting existing code to use optional chaining easier. So if you look here, we have this property, and we're accessing some properties on this. So we're doing settings.html and then settings.html.validate. And the problem is that each time we want to access one of these subproperties, we have to repeat the previous part. So this is a perfect use case for optional chaining. We're doing this because any of these properties could potentially be null, and we want to make sure we don't crash, but we don't want to repeat things. So let's use optional chaining instead. But instead of manually rewriting things, we can actually just use a refactoring. So I'm going to go in here and then use the expand selection command just to select the entire expression here. Go to my code actions and say convert to optional chain expression. And now you can see that VS Code has gone through here and just clean things up with optional chaining. That's much shorter. And if you have more chaining that's going on, if you're accessing more properties, then this can be really useful as well. So that's a quick new refactoring that we've added. Another big thing that we've worked on this iteration is adding support for marking when an API is deprecated. So a good use case of this is in the VS Code API. So VS Code has been under development for a while, and we have implementations for a number of things that have now entered into the JavaScript standard library. So one of these is the pad function. So back in old JavaScript, there was no standard implementation of padding. we were using this. Now we're actually running on a more modern JavaScript runtime. We'd really like to switch over, but we have all these users that are still using the old pad function. So what we've done here, this is our implementation of the pad function. If you go in, you can see that it's been marked deprecated with the JS comment and saying, hey, if you're using this function, you should use pad start instead. And if we go and we hover over pad here, you can actually see that it is showing that deprecated message. Now, the cool thing is that if I go and I say, find references here, and just find some places where pad is actually being used, you can see that all of the references to pad now have this little strike through. So that is a new feature that we've added. We're actually looking at the JS doc and saying, is this function that you're using deprecated? And if it is, then we add this little strike through. It makes, when you're using deprecated APIs, much more obvious, and you can detect that much more easily. So if I go in here and I hover, you can see I get that same message. So I can see, oh yeah, this is deprecated. And if I start typing in the file as well, so if I go and just say pad, should be, oh, maybe not in this case, but if in some suggestions, it will actually have the strike through as well for to make sure that you don't actually go and insert this suggestion in the first place. So I'll have to look and see what's going on there for this demo. Now, another thing, so these are going to probably be useful to everybody. You can just add deprecated comments to any function that you're working in. It's especially useful if you're publishing public API. One other cool feature that I want to spotlight here is for people that are working with larger JavaScript and TypeScript projects. So the VS Code code base, for example, has a few thousand TypeScript files. And when we first need to provide IntelliSense in one of the files, we actually have to go in and load the entire project so that we can do things like auto imports and all that type of thing. So this iteration, we've done some work to make sure that when you first load up a file in VS Code, then you can actually get some form of IntelliSense and wait while the full IntelliSense is still coming in. So just to demonstrate what this looks like, here I have my VS Code project open, and I'm just going to reload the window. And here, normally you can see that down in the status bar, it's actually initializing the JavaScript and TypeScript language features. And previously, that would mean that you wouldn't get any IntelliSense in the file until that all finished. With this new change that we've made called partial mode, you actually get some inline IntelliSense that's looking just at the current file and offering you some IntelliSense. So I get things like suggestions, I get the hover as you were seeing before. So we get this limited form of IntelliSense that's going in, and it's providing us a much better experience when you're first loading a file. This can also be especially helpful if you have a multiple project setup where you're switching between different projects. And as you switch to each one, TypeScript will need to go in and load that project so it can do things like provide auto imports for you. But as you're switching between them, that loading time might take a little while. So now you actually get some basic language features in your current file, even when you're quickly switching between projects and the project is being loaded in the background. So that's just a quick look at some of the new TypeScript features that we've added here. There's also some new language features, so definitely check out the TypeScript 4.0 blog because it showcases some of the new language features that have come to TypeScript 4.0 and some of the additional tooling features that we've added this iteration as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Matt. And I know you weren't expecting this, but quick plug for Matt on Twitter, who shares a bunch of, I think every day, right? VS Code tips and tricks. Yes, they're amazing. Keep it up, man. All right. So any questions that we have in the chat for Matt on the TypeScript features that I see just yet? It looks like Daniel is answering that as the moderator in there already, so nothing just yet, but we'll loop back on that towards the end just in case, Matt, okay?
Okay. All
right, next up, we have Connor, who's going to show us the auto-attach debugger improvements.
Yes, so like previously, we had a feature in VS Code called auto-attach, and I'll share my screen real quick here. So here I'm using the old version of VS Code, 147, and like there was a mode called auto attach that you could turn on. So there's the topological auto attach a setting as well as a user setting. So if I turn that, like this auto attach badge down here, and like what happens is that if I then run a node program with inspect flag. So if I run like node inspect brk hello.js, and I set a breakpoint here, then VS Code will then, oops, if I don't typo it, then like VS Code will attach to it, and then I can hit my breakpoint. But there were a few things that weren't so great about this. Like one of them is that So you have to actually like launch a program with the inspect flag. So if, for example, like a program is being launched by an npm script or something, or being launched by another program like a shell script, then you'd have to like modify that script to actually add the flag. So the new version of VS Code actually supports this basically improved version of auto attach. So like by default, it comes in a couple of modes. There's the smart mode, which is the default, which means that we attach to any a node script being run that's not inside Node modules, and also not one of the like known tools like TS Node or like Mocha or Ava that are used to actually run your code. And so like, yeah, so you can you can attach them without having any specific flags or anything. So for example, here inside my package.json, I have Ava, which is a common test runner, and then I have a test.js file. So what happens is now that auto attach is on and I'm in the smart mode, I can just run an npm test, and then without any further configuration, without adding any flags or putting any like command line flags in, I can just hit the breakpoints and be able to debug it automatically. But if I run like some other tool, like npm or something, we don't actually try to debug that because we know it isn't a build tool. And also I have people outside with weed whackers, of course, today.
Don't worry about that. Keep it going.
Yeah. Yeah. So and one like other a benefit is that previously the auto attach mode worked by kind of pulling your process tree, which especially on Windows caused a lot of resource usage. Whereas this mode is actually like there's no overhead to having auto attach on. You can just run with it on. It isn't going to take up any CPU cycles or spin up your fans or anything. And then also like auto attach is like instant. So before, if you had a program that exited quickly, you'd have to make sure to add inspect brk to make sure that your program waited for the debugger. But now, even if I have this program that just prints and exits, I can still run that and then attach to it without having to like add flags or without having to do anything manually to make sure that I can attach to it before the program exits. So, and also, again, I mentioned, it works like through scripts. So here I have a shell script that runs like 3 hellos in parallel. So if I do if I run that, like you see that there's now 3 processes we're attached to, all instantly attached, all just paused on the breakpoint. So so that's about it. Oh, and there's a few other modes. So if you don't like the smart mode, then you can turn it into the old mode by changing this filter to only with flag right here. Or if you want to debug everything, if you're actually like working, for example, on a Webpack plugin where you want to debug Webpack, you can have it attach always, which means it'll attach to any program, even if it looks like a build tool. And you can also customize the patterns like that uses for attachment by changing this. So if I had like some custom test runner, I could add a glob pattern, and this is applied on the script that's being run in the entry point. So I could say I want to debug any script inside a folder called like my cool test runner or something. And then all scripts inside of there, even if I have that installed in my node modules, will then be debugged now that I added the setting. So that's about it.
Wow, very cool, Connor. So a couple of things. One, to make sure I'm following and folks at home are following along as well, you have to turn on the auto attach debugger, right?
Yep.
Setting. And then you change the option from the typical, the way it attaches to be smart, right? And then that way it allows you to just attach to any node process that's running. Is that correct?
Yeah, so smart's actually the default now in 1.49. So
excellent.
Or whatever version we're on. Yeah, I think 1.49. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the other thing is just to make sure, and maybe a silly question, but you mentioned the inspect flag. What does that typically do for folks that maybe aren't familiar with Node and how to run that, what that flag does in the CLI really quick?
Yes. So normally that exposes like your process for debugging. So like you probably saw in the console, like Node.js printed like debugger listening on whatever hosting port number. That's like normally used by tools. So for example, like you can actually use if you like go to Chrome //inspect, like Chrome actually can attach to Node as well. And then if you enter that URL and on Chrome's Node Inspector, you can use that to attach to your Node process as well. So it basically like exposes like that interface that Chrome can use for debugging. We can use for debugging. There's other debugging tools that can also hook into that URL.
Excellent. And I didn't know. Today I learned. I didn't know you can debug shell scripts in VS Code. So that's awesome. So thank you for showing that.
Yeah, it was like debugging the program that the shell script ran, but I'm sure someone's probably written a shell script debugger as well.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification on that. We do have a question from a viewer. The question is, does auto attach somehow depend on the integrated terminal, or does it watch processes, something like that?
Yes. So actually, I can show you some behind the scenes real quick. So you might have seen like when I changed this patterns mode, like you saw like this a warning pop up. Again, that's basically saying that the debugger wants to change some environment variables inside the terminal. So the way this actually works is that I'll relaunch it real quick. So it actually sets this like node options variable, which then tells like a Node.js to basically import the special bootloader file before it starts running your program. And this is how we actually communicate back to VS Code to say, hey, we have a program running, we want to debug this. And then like this bootloader script then sets up the communication channel between the program and the VS Code debugger. So it does depend. Like you have to run inside of the integrated terminal to actually have these variables be available to be debugged.
Nice, interesting. And thank you for that question, Paul. All right, if you have more questions about that, feel free to drop them in the question and answer chat room area there, folks that are viewing, and we'll be sure to get to them towards the end. We're going to move on to the next part of the live event today, and now we're going to be sharing some updates from some of the other extensions that we have that are part of Visual Studio Code. The first up we have for that is Savannah, who's going to be talking about PyLance. Over to you, Savannah.
So so quick refresher for those who are uninitiated. PyLance is the new Python language server that our team released back at the end of June. PyLance is an extension that is totally complementary to the core Python extension that many of you are already using, know, love. And basically what it does is it extends the Python extension experience by providing all the bells and whistles of like what I would consider a great developer experience. So that's what some people call IntelliSense. Other people might recognize this as completion, signature help, doc strings, code nav, diagnostics, code actions. And so kind of like alongside all these great features that a lot of us are familiar with, PyLance, and like what makes it special is that it's like ultra performant. So I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with like opening up a Python project and then watching your editor IDE kind of like scan through your files before you actually like get to writing code. And why PyLance is so cool is that we don't do any upfront indexing of your files. So that means that you get to writing code faster, you get all these great features more quickly, and we also use less memory in the process. And then kind of like one other thing I want to mention before jumping into like a really quick demo is that PyLance is a language server, but under the hood, it also makes use of Pywrite, which is an open source type checking tool, which is also developed here at Microsoft. And so basically what this means is that you get a robust language server as well as a type checker all in one. So if you're interested in types in Python, PyLance is a really good option. If you're not interested in types in Python, you can still benefit from some of the type information that we show in signature help and in the completion tooltips. So I'm going to try and move over to screen sharing. This should be interesting. All right, I think my screen is shared, and Brian is there. So I'm going to show this really simple Flask app that I have. I have this root endpoint that I want to finish off, and I'm going to call out one of the really cool features that we brought to PyLance in the last month or so, which is auto imports. This is something that the Python community has been asking for a while. So I can see this in action if I say I want to render template from Flask to render an HTML page at this endpoint. And so what you can see here is that in the completion list, we also have auto import completions. So this will, on selecting this, will complete the line, and it will also add from Flask import render template to the top of the file. Right. But because I already had this import statement, I've already imported the Flask module into this file, where PyLance is actually a little smarter than that, in that like it recognizes that you've already added that import. Let's not add a duplicate. So it adds the function alphabetically in the import statement. So there's less cleanup at the end. Now that we have this function, I want to start invoking it. Something that I mentioned like just a second ago is that even if you're not using types in Python, PyLance is still a great option because it exposes type information in signature help. For me, this means that I don't have to go and read doc strings or go to external documentation to understand how to use this function. This is particularly helpful for like third-party libraries that you might not be familiar with. And so we can see here that PyLance is saying like, okay, the template name or list is of type string or iterable text, and it returns something that's of type text. So that's really helpful because I just want to pass in home.html. Great. You can also get this information on Hover, where we also expose the doc string, and this is also available in the completion tooltip, and it works for other symbols as well. And then the last thing that I wanted to call out, which is something that I was super excited about, is that 2 releases ago, we release every week, we brought semantic colorization to PyLance. And so if you're unfamiliar with semantic colorization, it's basically just an extension of syntax highlighting where PyLance generates semantic tokens. And so the theme can pick up on that and color the keywords and symbols differently to make your code more readable. So we can see that Flask is a module, so it's of a different color than a function, which is of a different color than a variable or a string or a bool. And so this is pretty awesome, one of my favorite features. And I do want to mention that with this feature, you do have to pick a theme which supports semantic tokens. A good option to get started is the built-in Dark Plus theme. So you can see like the color theme changed, but the treatment is kind of the same, where functions are a different color than modules, etc. And then I know because someone will ask, and I get asked like every time I take a GIF, is that I was using the One Dark Pro theme. This is a theme that is like my team's favorite. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope that you give PyLance a shot and let us know what you think.
Nice, thank you, Savannah. You mentioned you all release every week?
Yeah, well, right now we're in public preview, so we're making lots of changes all the time. So I had like a laundry list of features that are currently in PyLance, but there's more coming all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's awesome. I was surprised to hear that, but that's awesome. So I guess newbie question for you, as I'm waiting for the viewers to potentially pop up some questions for you about PyLance. Newbie, I'm completely new to Python, and I'm starting to do development in Visual Studio Code. I search for extensions with Python. I see there's the Python extension by Microsoft, and then there's also PyLance. So do those go hand in hand? Do I install both of those? What should I do?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really great question. So you do need the Python extension installed in your works in VS Code before you can use PyLance. If you don't have the Python extension installed and you try and install PyLance, we will install it for you. So they're very tightly coupled. Again, like PyLance really just builds on the Python experience. So you still with PyLance, you're getting all these great language features. With Python, you're getting your debugging, etc. And so I think someone in the chat may have asked, but PyLance, you can install it from the marketplace. And yeah.
Okay, cool. One last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
The name. How did you all come up with the name for it? That's pretty cool.
Oh my gosh, that was such our team really spun our wheels on that for a while. But we wanted to name it something that was related to Monty Python, which is the original reason why Python is named Python. And so Lancelot is the first bridge keeper the first one to correctly answer the bridge keeper's questions. And so that's why it's PyLance.
Nice.
Yeah.
All the knights who say me. All right. I digress. I'm done. Next up for you folks, we have, and thank you so much, Savannah. That was great. Next up, we have Felicia, who's going to be sharing live share browser join extension feature. So Felicia, over to you.
Hey, Brian, thank you for that clever pun. All right, so today we're going to be talking about LiveShare. LiveShare, for those who don't know, is a full body, full fidelity collaborator that you can use an extension from VS Code. And what that does is it allows you to share your repository and your coding context with anybody. They can jump right into your code, help you do all the cool functionality that VS Code has inbuilt, including things like terminals and the IntelliSense that's inbuilt. And the newest feature that we have for LiveShare right now that helps with this remote times that we see is browser join. So bear with me while I try to do a live demo, right? So I'm going to share my screen and wish me luck because these are always tricky. So, all right. Hopefully y'all can see my screen. Yep. Okay, so on the left, you will see that I have an extension, a Pomodoro extension, which actually works with LiveShare. LiveShare has a big extensibility model, so you can add all sorts of fun stuff that helps you collaborate within the extension. And that's a project that's open. Now, I want to share this with somebody who's interested in learning how to build VS Code extensions. And they're like, hey, can you share how you're doing this? So I am on the LiveShare extension, and I just started a read-write LiveShare session. This collaboration session is going to produce a shareable link, much like any shareable doc that you're more used to. Now I can copy this link, and you can imagine that I sent this to somebody that I want to collaborate with over some form of communication. And they're on the right side, and they're going to go paste it in the browser. And once they paste it in the browser, apologies for this. You'll see that there's an option over here where it says join LiveShare session from the browser. This is a preview feature that we rolled out especially for COVID. And the reason for doing this is that we want to reduce barriers to entry for a lot of people who may just want to jump right into code, who may not understand how to use VS Code necessarily, but just want to learn. And so it's really targeted to students, to people who don't necessarily understand enterprise tooling or pro developer tooling for interview candidates, but it could also be me and you, Brian. So, where I lost my sign in. Let me do it again. So I'll click on share from the browser and join from the browser rather, and okay, so I'm going to sign in, and it's going to show you two options, which is great. You have two identities to select from. You also saw there was a possibility to just not sign in and continue without a login. So you saw I'm signing in using GitHub, and I have a fake identity, so don't sue me. And this is just for clarity, and you'll soon see that you're in the project. Now, what's really cool is you get all the bells and whistles of VS Code right in the browser. I hope you can see this. I'm struggling to keep the two screens together in view, but you're able to fully navigate the entire project, which is open on the host side, and I'm able to go through all the files that are interesting. You'll also notice that there's actually IntelliSense built in because this is actually just using the VS Code remoting API in the browser. So it's really powerful, actually. And another cool feature that we've added is that there's this thing called session chat, where when you're in the context of a collaboration session, you don't have to change context, but it can actually chat from within over here. And that really helps you keep your focus. We also have asynchronous communication built in. So assuming that the context is that Scout Emerson has come in to ask questions, they can always ask things and leave comments over here and say, I don't understand this. And it allows you to have this ability to drive not just your own session, but also follow the other person if required. Yeah, so that's browser join.
Wow, I love that. I really especially love that because of like you mentioned, there might be folks that don't have tools installed. Maybe they're completely new to development and somebody's taking it on to help share with them and teach them about these things. And this type of feature set enables them to do that more easily. So that the comment thing that you shared there, is that just per session or does that persist, or how does that work in case people maybe come back over, maybe, you're studying with somebody and, they mentioned something one day, you don't get to it that day. Can you come back tomorrow and still see those comments?
That's a great question. So that is something that's ephemeral. So it's related to the session and the context of a session. So they do not stay. But that is something that we've heard as something that people might want to use in the future. So if there's feedback, we'll take a look at it. Excellent.
One more question for you. I saw that there was the option, before you signed in as your alter ego, that identity that you have there, there was an option to sign in as guest. What would be the difference in the experience for somebody if they don't sign in with an account versus signing in as a guest?
That's a great question. So it's absolutely the same. So initially, there was a restriction on where you had to just sign in as an anonymous read-only user. But recently, we've actually allowed anonymous users to have read-write permissions, which means that you can have the exact same experience other than your host knowing that you're anonymous. That's about the only difference.
Anonymous. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that. That's great. I'm just jumping through the Q&A to see if we have any more questions to cover. Otherwise, we will call it a day. We have some love for Pyrite as well, by the way, from Paul Savannah. There you go. All right, I think that about does it. Well, if we didn't get to your question and maybe you have future questions, like I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the session today, these are recorded and they get posted to the YouTube account. It's the Visual Studio Code YouTube account. Search for that on there. In addition, you can catch all the release notes for Visual Studio Code up on the website, code.visualstudio.com, or directly via the editor itself under the help menu. I want to thank everybody from the VS Code team. Thank you so much for all the amazing demos. You all did fantastic, and it was really interesting stuff. And thank you all at home that were watching this and joining us. We appreciate you being here. If you have feedback, you're enjoying these, you're getting value out of these live events, you want to let the VS Code team know that you want to see more of it, let them know by commenting on the YouTube video when that goes live, or mentioning the code account on Twitter, and they appreciate that feedback. So thank you all again. Have a good rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you next time. Bye.